we today?
Good.
Yes.
So I'm going to teach you guys a Samoan word. So talofa means hello in Samoan. So when I say talofa, you're going to reply back to me and say talofa. Talofa.
Talofa.
Great, wonderful. We're alert, which is good then. Okay, so I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Dawe Foundation for the generous invitation to talk about my work. And I'd also like to acknowledge the British Council New Zealand for supporting my trip here in the UK. I'm here to talk about a body of work entitled Moa no uta. So where is Samoa? So Samoa is actually in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And the Pacific Ocean itself actually occupies 1/3 of the world's Earth space. And it's the biggest ocean on the planet. Albert Wendt talks about how the spaces, the ocean between the islands is not a vacant space, but a land. So a lot of people might, look at, the Pacific Ocean, with scattered dots. But for us, when we actually live in the region, we actually look at we look at it as a liquid continent. So the water is land. It's not a barrier, but it's actually a space that connects us. And then, so within the region itself, there are over 50,000 islands, and there are 3,200 indigenous languages that are actively spoken every day. And then I live here in Samoa, the center of the world. And then the capital city is Apia, and then I live in Mount Vaya, which is like a 10-15 minute drive from the capital city of Apia. Okay, so this is my family. So my father and my mom, they both met in Samoa. So how my dad came to Samoa is that he was a JICA volunteer. And then, so he was part of a group of Japanese volunteers. They were dispatched into the Pacific, and the first country in the Pacific was Samoa in their 60s. He made, and then there was a village in Upolu Island called Singamonga, which was kind of like a Japanese hub. It was kind of like a Japan town in Upolu Island. And I mean, of course, one would fall in love with a beautiful Samoan woman. And they apparently went out on a group date. So a group of Japanese volunteers and my mom's sisters from the village, they all met up in a group date, and that's how they met. So I'm the eldest of three. I'm also sort of trilingual. So like I was just explaining before that my Japanese is kind of like primary school Japanese. So if we were to have Japanese, then my level of Japanese is kind of like primary school. So I know enough to get away with it. And then so I went to primary school in Japan. So that's what you see, my graduation ceremony in Japan. Yeah. And then so that's my background. So a Japanese father, Samoan mother. So it was around maybe 2015, 2016. So my parents are separated, and then so I was helping my mother declutter some of my father's things when he left. And then so during the decluttering process, I came across this Nike shoebox. And I opened the Nike shoebox because I thought oh great, I got a new pair of shoes. And I actually found this kimono. And then my mom's, so I asked my mom, Mom, who owns this kimono? And then she said, oh, that's your Japanese grandmother's kimono. And I thought it was really touching that my dad actually carried, his mother's kimono with him when he actually traveled over to Samoa. But when he separated, he didn't take everything. Yeah, so my dad now, lives in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And then so when I looked at my grandmother's silk kimono, so that's Masako and Nobuo Kihara, so those are my Japanese grandparents. And the color of the kimono looked very similar to the Samoan backcloth, which is called siapo. And that's when I realized that maybe perhaps I could actually, combine the two together, where I would make these series of kimonos out of Samoan backcloth. Or what we call siapo. And then so, it's much like, Japanese washi paper. It's a handmade paper. And then so, I've decided that I would use my interracial heritage, as a point of conceptual departure to explore, if there was any connection between Japan and Pacific and specifically to Samoa. And then I actually found some really surprising, a lot of surprising things. So what I'm going to provide you is a glimpse of my extensive research about the Japanese representation of Oceania. So you have netsuke. So netsuke is, this little wooden idol that sort of hangs, of your obi. And then so I think netsuke is kind of like a very popular collector's item in the auction market. They come in variety of things, variety of shapes. What's really interesting about the depiction of Pacific Islanders with the netsuke is that they're always holding a red coral. And it's also very phallic. And then so, that was, netsuke, that was really interesting, portraying a, Pacific Islander. And then I think that this may be the first portrait of a Pacific Island person, captured through the ukiyo-e technique. So I found this at the Met. And then again, what's really interesting here is that the portrait of the Pacific Islander is also situated next to a red coral. I don't know what that pairing is. And then you also have the woodblock prints of Paul Jacquelet. So he was a son of French diplomats who was trained in the art of ukiyo-e. And then so, through his parents' connection, being the French diplomats, he worked his way into the Japanese Imperial Army to be a war artist. And then so that allowed him to actually travel across Micronesia during World War I, the Japanese occupation of Micronesia, and to become the official war artist, where he actually used the ukiyo-e technique, to capture the portraits of Pacific people. So in a way, he was kind of like a Gauguin of Japan, And then I also looked at the function of kimono within Oceania, and I found this interesting quote by a South Korean art historian, and he states, "Japan's racism was unlike the racism from the West. The West would give a I'm going to read it from here. The West gave a quasi-scientific explanation of how the white man was superior due to his skin color and facial structure. Japan was highly aware of the Western view of the East and acknowledged their biological inferiority. They knew they couldn't overcome those views to prove their superiority, so they pushed forward a new ethnology where the evaluation criteria for racial superiority was modernity." So what you have here is kimono used as a process of modernity. And then so you have this Marshallese woman here, dressed in a kimono as if to say that they're being modernized, and people in the Marshall Islands, they also have to change their name to a Japanese name, go to a Japanese school, and then to also learn Japanese, and then to also practice Shinto Buddhism. And then you also have, indigenous people in Taiwan, it's also going through the same similar process. And then so, the interesting thing about the function of kimono as a tool for modernity kind of parallels to how the mother habit dress was actually introduced into the Pacific region. It kind of has a similar function. And then you also have in manga, Pacific people were racialized, through this Jim Crow blackfacing. And then so what I'm going to play you is a short video of Boken Dankichi manga, and the story goes is that there was a little Japanese boy who swam out into the ocean, and he slept and he woke up and he found himself accidentally in a South Sea island somewhere. And then he imposed himself to be a king of the island. So now I'm going to play this video. Can I sit there? I don't know if there's any Japanologists here, but you can actually hear the sound of like this Japanese song "Neko Hunchatta." I don't know if you can, it's a famous children's song in Japan. And then you also have these kimonos, which are called omoshirogara. These are children's propaganda kimonos. So in order to drum up the Japanese population to join the Japanese army, many kimono houses actually made these kimonos of Japanese imperialism. What you see here is this Japanese ship where these Pacific Island kids are kind of like waving at them. So it's very sort of paternalist. And then as time moved forward, there's one of my favorite movies, King Kong and Godzilla. And the thing is that I didn't know that there was a version of this movie in 1963, directed by Ishiro Honda, where you have Japanese people back-facing, posing as Pacific Islanders. And then so the story goes is that there's an actual pharmaceutical company in the movie called Pacific Pharmaceutical Company that goes to a mysterious island in the Pacific and finds this exotic flower that can cure all the cancers. But it's actually heavily guarded by King Kong. And then so, these Japanese, scientists would arrive into the island, and try and, take over King Kong. They successfully do it, gains hold of the resources, takes King Kong, back to Japan. But King Kong frees itself, and then the only creature that could withstand, the force of King Kong was to activate Godzilla, who was trapped in an ice cap, and it was activated by American nuclear missile. So it's a metaphor for this geopolitical relationship between Japan and the United States and the Pacific region. And then so now I'm going to play you a song that is actually called Sāmoa no uta, or a song from Samoa. And this is a very popular song amongst the primary school students. And so this is a song that perhaps Japanese people began to understand what Samoa is actually through this colonial lens. And then so how this song actually came about was that in the early 60s, the NHK came to Samoa and wanted to do a documentary about Samoa. And then there's a segment in the documentary where they approached a school in island of Hawaii, and then asked a school teacher if they could film the children performing Samoan song and dance. And then they filmed that, and then when they actually took the footage back to Japan, they couldn't find anybody in Japan to translate the Samoan language to Japanese. And so what they did is that they took the melody but replaced the lyrics. And this is what the lyrics sounds like. So as you can see, like the repeat of the colonial tropes that happens in this song. And then, so, okay. And then, so I found this really interesting article at the Nelson Public Library in Apia, where a group of Japanese scientists were traveling across the Pacific looking for the origins of Japanese people. They believed that they actually could have come from the Pacific. And then, so, this is like another sort of weird connection between Japan and the Pacific, and specifically to Samoa. And then, so I actually went to this resort. It's a spa, it's like a hot pool onsen. It's called the Spa Resort Hawaiians in Iwaki City in Fukushima Prefecture. And so what's really interesting about this particular resort is that the resort is actually like the biggest employer in Iwaki City. So as soon as you arrive, like you see actually sort of portraits of Japanese people dressed as Pacific Islanders, like grass skirts and things like that. And then, so the sea, and then so the, yeah. And then, so what's really interesting about this resort is that not only it's an onsen, but it actually capitalizes on the paradise trope and the Pacific tourism aesthetic in marketing itself. It was also the host of the 8th Pacific Leaders Meeting, Palm 8, and it's chaired by the Samoan Prime Minister.
On May 18th, the 8th Pacific Islands Leaders Meeting, Palm 8, was held in Iwaki City, Fukushima Prefecture, attended by the leaders of 19 countries and regions, including co-chair Samoa. Iwaki is a city situated in a region on the Pacific coast known as Hamadori and is known for its rich nature and as an appealing tourist destination. Over 7 years having passed since Iwaki suffered severe damage in the Great East Japan earthquake on March 11, 2011, it has achieved remarkable reconstruction and rejuvenation. Right after the earthquake, it was said that there might remain the impact of the nuclear power station accident. However, now, radiation levels are the same as any other major city around the world, and all produce and food are proven completely safe, which are helping Iwaki to regain its vitality. The venue for the Palm 8 Summit was Spa Resort Hawaiians. Although the resort was severely damaged by the earthquake, today it is visited by many tourists who come to enjoy the hot springs-based theme park. This was the second time for the Palm Summit to be held in Iwaki, following on from the summit in 2015, and the aim in holding it once again was to express appreciation for the support received at the time of the earthquake and also show the progress being made in reconstruction and rejuvenation.
安全で安心で美味しいです。どうぞこういう行くまで今宵の夕食をお楽しみいただきたいと思います。
At the banquet, there was also a show featuring traditional kimono designed in the image of the participating countries. These kimonos are part of a project for the 2020 Tokyo Olympic and Paralympic Games and have already been created for 100 countries around the world. During their stay, the leaders of the Palm Nations were treated to a warm welcome and hospitality in Iwaki. The leaders visited Wonder Farm, a facility near the summit venue where visitors can enjoy hands-on experience of farming. Here, 11 varieties of tomato are cultivated, taking advantage of Iwaki's abundant sunlight. The leaders enjoyed picking the tomatoes at Wonder Farm.
It's amazing, it's like going to heaven, and lots of tomatoes.
The leaders' spouses visited the Aquamarine Fukushima Aquarium.
環境を再現しているような展示を目指した施設ですので、世界の方、それから日本の方も来ていただきたいと思います。
豊かな自然、歴史、文化に触れることができ、美味しい果物、お米、日本酒を楽しむことができます。皆さんのご来店を歓迎いたします。
All the leaders at the Palm 8 Summit were able to enjoy and experience the full range of all the attractions Iwaki has to offer. We look forward to welcoming more visitors to Fukushima full of smiles.
So as part of my research, I went back to Japan. This is like maybe after 20 years later. And I wanted to study more about, how one transforms itself into a maiko or geisha. So when I was in Kyoto, I paid for a service to transform myself into a maiko, which is a apprentice geisha. I thought this was, going to be, an amazing spiritual experience, but it's kind of like a McDonald's service, because you pay for a service and then you kind of like wait a bit, and then they come and get you, and then you kind of sit on the makeup chair alongside with like other Japanese women, it was kind of like a factory. Okay, get your makeup down, take your kimono. Okay, what do you want to wear? Okay, where do you want to get photographed? It's like, bang, 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 you're out. It wasn't as spiritually transformative as I wanted. But I don't think I look bad. Anyway, so how all of this research comes together is through the concept of va that's been elaborated by Sāmoan writer by the name of Albert Wendt. And he explains the va as the important to the Samoan view of reality is the concept of va or wa in Maori or Japanese, or Maori are the indigenous peoples of Aotearoa, New Zealand. Va is a space between, the betweenness, not an empty space, not a space that separates, but space that relates, that holds separate entities and things together in the unity that is all, the space that is context giving meaning to things. And then so, what I wanted to do, in response to my research, is to reframe, is to, first of all, reappropriate or reclaim the narratives of the research, all these sort of colonial tropes, by reframing the histories, by reclaiming these historical narratives, by reframing the va between the Samoan relational space between Japan and the Moana Pacific, and specifically to Samoa, taking an indigenous interpretation of trans-Pacific identity, gender, and history, whilst referencing my own interracial Sāmoan and Japanese heritage as a point of conceptual departure. Okay, so the production of siapo. There are a total of 25 kimonos. They were all made to fit me, but I ended up not wearing them because by the time they actually make kimonos out of siapo, it's actually like cardboard, and you can't wear it. So I've decided that I would actually present them as textile sculptures. So this is the paper mulberry tree, the branch of the paper mulberry tree, and how it's actually made is that we actually strip the inner bark of the paper mulberry tree, and it's soaked, and it's beaten, and it's dried, and it's layered on, and then and we use the potato starch to glue them together, and that's how we get the sheet. I work with an illustrator to come up with a variety of narratives in the surface design, which is then digitally printed and it's beaded. So this is my mom beading. And then so each of the 25 kimonos were beaded by myself and a member of my family. Okay, so now I'm just going to read to you some notes about all the 5 phases that was released during the 5 years. During the 5-year project of the Moa no uta exhibition from 2019 to 2023. Okay, so the first phase is called Vasa Ocean, portrays the current state of the surrounding ocean in Samoa, where the sea creatures and corals are being threatened by global warming and frequent cyclones. The Great Wave of Kanagawa, woodblock print by Hokusai, created in the late 1831, has been adapted to represent the shape of the tsunami-like waves in reference to the tsunami disaster in Samoa in 2009 and the Fukushima nuclear disaster of 2011, where both places share the same sea floor. There are virtually no corals left in Samoa due to the impact of cyclones, and natural disasters, and the rising ocean acidification since the 17th century, which coincides with the arrival of the first Europeans in Samoa. The coconuts floating on the wave alludes to the Japanese poem Yashinomi, or A Coconut, by poet Shimazaki Tuzon. The poem was inspired by Shimazaki's friend, the folklorist Yanagata Kunio, who found a coconut on Irago Misaki Beach in Aichi Ken in central Honshu Island, which led to him to believe that the origins of the Japanese people were from the south, perhaps Okinawa or the Pacific Islands. So the floating coconuts are also share the ocean waves alongside floating plastic bags and Coke cans, alluding to the human impact of the ocean. Okay, so the second phase is called Whanua or Land. Whanua or Land series is a forewarning against Samoa's speculative future that favors economic development and globalization at the expense of traditional knowledge that stems from local environment. So the newly built Vaisingano Bridge, which you see in the middle kimono there, which was built in 2020, constructed by the assistance of the Japanese government, which commenced in April of 2018. The new bridge is 75 meters long and 1.5 meters high, higher than the previous bridge, which was in danger of extreme floods as climate change became intensified over the years. Japanese aid, together with aid from other industrialized countries in Samoa, are part of what the development studies scholar, Dr. Masabi Tujisa, who calls it Aidscape, where much of Samoa's infrastructure is heavily funded by foreign aid and are slowly changing the aesthetic of the local culture. Whanua Land aims to raise questions about the impact of foreign aid projects have on the sustainability of the local environment in Samoa, among others, including the introduction of invasive weeds by livestock, which you have the cow in the middle here, that comes from Australia, that actually travels over to the island, like with digesting like Australian weeds, invasive weeds, and they travel over to Samoa and they poo the invasive weeds everywhere. So now, like the indigenous plants in Samoa are actually competing for space with these invasive weeds, which is kind of like, analogy for colonialism, right? Yes. So the absence of people within the kimono highlights how the Earth's climate and ecosystem are being impacted by results of human activity. Okay, so this is the third one. Okay, so Moana Pacific serves as a forewarning, again, increasing levels of resource extraction, including fisheries and seabed mining by foreign powers seeking to affirm their geopolitical dominance across the Pacific Ocean. The surface design of the Siapo kimono, see how they play on Siapo kimono? Oh, there you go. Siapo kimono portrays a chaotic oceanscape with nuclear testing occurring in the background, while a series of hands piercing through the mushroom clouds uprooting marine species, while deep-sea mining are simultaneously happening in the Pacific. And then, so what the deep-sea mining is looking for is these modules in the deep sea that actually has the minerals that activates these Tesla cars that goes with batteries. So I kind of find it interesting that you kind of extract something to destroy an environment for a clean green energy. Vehicles is kind of odd. And then, so the hands from the sky are loosely inspired by the ancient lore in Samoa describing the genesis of the Samoan word pālangi, where Samoans, upon seeing the first Europeans across the horizon, believed that they had pierced through the sky, so pierced meaning pa, through langi, sky, pālangi. In and amongst the chaos, however, we see the Pacific Island double-hull canoe using traditional navigation methods, sailing across the ocean as a symbol of indigenous resilience, while foreign vessels arrive nearby for domination. The missile that you see here on your far right, there's an interesting story about that missile. was launched by the Japanese submarine, alludes to an incident which occurred in the 13th of January 1942, where Japanese submarine surfaced in Tutuila Island in American Samoa, where the Japanese submarine actually fired 15 shells aimed at the U.S. naval station in Tutuila Island, only for the first shell to fail at the rear of the Frank Shimasaki's supermarket, which did not detonate. Ironically, the store was owned by one of Tutuila's few Japanese residents. The store was closed as Mr. Shimasaki had been an intern as an enemy alien. So this is Taiheiyo. So it's it's inspired by King Kong and Godzilla. Inspired by my visit to the spa resort Hawaiians in Iwaki City, and then how the movie kind of alludes to this geopolitical relationship between Japan, U.S. and the Pacific region. Okay, so symbolically, Godzilla represents the powerful alliance between Japan and the U.S., which saw U.S. building nuclear power plants across Japan as a show of technological advancements against King Kong, represented as the Pacific or as being less advanced. However, in my Phase 4, in this particular work, so Taiheiyo means Pacific in Japanese, refrains the film's fictional plot by making reference to the reality of the nuclear waste created as a result of U.S.-Japan alliance leaking into the Pacific Ocean from the damaged Fukushima Daiichi power plant in 2011, thus impacting the ecology, marine life, and the fisheries that Japan and the Pacific both rely on for food security. So all the toxic waste that was created by the Fukushima power plant, they're actually looking to release it into the Pacific Ocean, which is really dangerous. This paradoxical relationship alludes to the late Banaban scholar Teresia Teaiwa definition of militarism as a phenomenon by which military or paramilitary forces ensures the running of a tourist industry at the same time that same tourist industry masks the military force behind it. And then this is the last one. Tuli. So Tuli is the Samoan word for the Pacific golden plover. So this body of work makes an explicit reference to the Pacific golden plover, or Tuli, and their era perspective of the Pacific Ocean during their migration. So the Tuli actually begins their migration from Alaska and Serbia, and then transits into different islands across the Pacific, including Japan, Samoa, and Aotearoa, New Zealand, and then they actually fly back again. It is said that Tangaloa, or the supreme god of Samoa, saw Tuli as their favorite pet and messenger. So Tangaloa fished up the island so that Tuli could actually rest on it. So Tuli have witnessed the winds of change across the Moana, the Pacific Ocean, with the arrival of colonial expansion, world wars, nuclear testing, the atmospheric changes in the air. Today, the Tuli migration route have been disturbed by excess pollution in the natural habitat, climate change, and aviation industry. So the work actually, sheds light to the plight of these small birds. So this is kind of like a graphic illustration of what the actual kimonos look like. So this is how they first begin as a junior Tuli bird, and then when they mature, they look like this, and that's kind of like their migration map. Yeah. And some close-up details of the beading that is happening in each of the kimonos, thanks to my mother and my family. And then now I'm going to play you a silent video, which, so I need to press, yeah, is it playing? Yeah, great. So the thing is that you usually start from like Phase 1 to Phase 5, but in this case, I actually started with Phase 1 and went Phase 2, 3, 4, 5. And so as you can see, at each of the 5 phases, they graphically each connect. So the idea is that it's presented as a large mural. Each kimono is 1 meter in width and 2 meters in height. And then so together they make up a large mural. So as you can see here, the ocean here also connects to this part. So imagine that, you know, it's a book that's divided into 5 chapters. So by the way, these are World War II planes that are sort of morphing itself to the Thule bird. And then you have the tuna swimming order on the Pacific region. So to conclude, this is my last slide. These are the list of exhibitions I currently have and will be having in the UK. So I currently have work in a group exhibition at Soma House entitled Transfeminism, and one of the curators is here, Vivieaere. Thank you for coming. I have an exhibition entitled Paradise Camp, which premiered at the New Zealand, Aotearoa New Zealand Pavilion at the 59th Venice Biennale, which is going to have its UK premiere at the Sainsbury Centre. So Tanya Moore is the curator, and I'm sure she's here somewhere. And then I actually have a permanent work on view at the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology at the University of Cambridge. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yuki. That was fascinating. These days I was revisiting your work as I knew it when I was living in Aotearoa, New Zealand. We met a few years ago in Auckland, and I was following your work from the photographic series, the Salome series, where you appear as a 19th century lady dressed in black, and as part of the developed colonial landscape of Aotearoa, New Zealand, as a mysterious figure that intrigued me enormously. Also, your series, your self-portraits posing as a dusky maiden, which is a very, very visited concept of the Pacific woman, female figure as a sensual, almost as an offering for the male gaze. And you have transgressed all these roles politically with your image throughout this photographic series. And then, of course, it came this large project you did for Venice, the Paradise Camp, that depicted the Fa'afafine, your community in Samoa, whom I happened to meet in Auckland, because the Pacific communities in Auckland are very important. It's actually, I heard once something that shocked me, because the population of Auckland was so small compared to London, where I came from, that, you know, a city of 1.5 million people could host the biggest community of Polynesians in the world. That was by virtue of the diversity of the Polynesian Pacific community members, and it was incredibly diverse and rich. So I was exposed by living in Auckland to the Pacific. And among the artists from the Pacific that I was lucky to meet and work with, and listening to the stories and reading the theorists, the scholars, talk about the Moana, the Pacific, which is this glue, this continent that unites all the people from the Pacific. It's a sacred space. I learned so much about the existence in the Pacific. So I want to start by, dwelling a little bit on the wa. For Maoris, the wa, and I don't know how do you say it in Japanese, but it's that space in between, which is not a void, but it's a relational space. And that concept of relation is very spoken about now in contemporary art and culture. We're talking a lot about relational art and ways of doing in community, but it always feels to me, after the experience of being among your people in the Pacific, as something a little bit like secondhand. The intention is good, but this living concept of the wa is not with us in this culture. So I would like to learn more and to give the opportunity for all of us to learn more from you about the va. Can you say it in a way that makes sense for you in a few words?
So it'd be great if we can just kind of like skip through the the slide, because Albert Wen kind of talks about it perfectly, you know, the understanding of the concept of va is for me really comes from his work. And then so I didn't read the second part, but the meanings change as the relations and the context change. The well-known Samoan expression is ia te ule va. Cherish, nurse, care the va or the relationships. This is crucial in communal cultures that value the group, unity more than individualism, who perceive the individual person, creature, thing in terms of a group, in terms of the va relationships. And then so it's the relationship that actually holds us together, that actually you know, holds us together, and it's the relationship that establishes who we are and what role we play within the community, you know, and the wider society. There's also the va between, there's many facets of va, and the kind of va that I always talk about is called va whilawa'i, which means the va between people and the va between people and nature. And then, so if we looked at, so it's not a space that separates, but it's a space that connects. And then so, and it's a space that connects us to the present, you know, to our future ancestors. So that's why we say future ancestors, because for us we walk back, you know, we walk backwards into the future, while we walk forward into the past. And then so what this means is that our ancestral principles is what guides us to how we navigate the present and how we move into the future. And then so when I say future ancestors, it's like, you know, the ancestors that are not born, but who will become like my future ancestors. So so it has relationship to the way in which we understand time and space, where I think, you know, in the context of neocolonialism, I think the concept of va is very important for indigenous people, because it makes us reflect on the indigenous, you know, the principles of our ancestors that provides us the guidance to how to actually navigate the future with caring for the land, the rematriation of the land. So I know that in this part of the world, you know, repatriation is a big thing, but rematriation is something that is important to us. It's like, well, how can we, you know, move beyond patriarchy and then embrace the matriarchy? And through the process of matriarchy, how can we restore the land? Yeah, rematriation. I don't know if anybody is familiar with that concept. Yeah. You know, like how can the past inform us? You know, not just an idea, but it's something that's very solid. You know, that we can actually move forward with, so that we can actually, because when we talk about our ancestors, we're actually talking about the land. So if we stop talking about our ancestors, then we actually start talking about the land, and then we actually stop taking care of the land. And then so our ties to the land and to the ancestor is very important. Yeah. So in Samoa, I live in a palami land, or it's a what you call a freehold land. And then so every time when I meet another Samoan person and they ask me, oh, where's your village? Because usually, you know, when you ask a Samoan where your village is, you know, you're a person that is tied to that village. But because I live in a freehold land, I always have to say that, well, I live in Mount Vaya, but my ancestral village is in, you know, is in Manua Island. So even, you know, within the local context, I have to also be careful about, you know, indigeneity. Because yes, I'm indigenous to Samoa, but I'm not indigenous to the land that I live. my indigenous village is actually in a different village.
So the question here is the entanglement of the human with the land.
Yeah.
That is so natural because of the concept of the va uniting
Yes.
us all with nature.
Yes.
So the caring for the land is automatic.
Yes.
Because unless you care for the land, you're not going to be happy, healthy,
Yeah.
prosperous.
Well, because you can't grow anything from
You can't
concrete.
grow, exactly. So this is something that urban people from Europe, from the northern hemisphere, from bigger cities, don't have an immediate knowledge of because of the detachment from where, I mean, children don't know in big cities. I come from South America, but I was born in a big city. We didn't see the cows all the time. We ate the meat, but it came from the supermarket. So this detachment that we carry with us, Western civilization, and especially lately, much more detached, despite the fact that we're claiming we are wanting to get close to nature. It's very difficult to be close.
Yeah, but the thing is that we also have that problem in Samoa as well.
Yeah.
Because, the way in which the Samoan economy sustains itself through is foreign aid, tourism, and agriculture. And then, with agricultural exports, it's usually the coconut and the taro. And everything else we have to grow. Subsistence farming is something that's widely practiced. But, being a developing country, where you actually, having to rely on actually sort of, importing, things from overseas, we are trying to find a balance of how can we actually maintain our own autonomy, as an independent nation, while relying on all these imports,
Yes, I saw it across the Pacific.
Yeah, so, that's one of the problems that we have at the moment is that, sometimes it feels like there's a lack of things because we don't have the technology, to produce, because of, we went through 2 colonialisms, so, we are still sort of finding our feet within the context of globalization. But yeah, let's see. So what I'm trying to allude to in my kimono series is the idea of neocolonialism, through aid, through resource extraction, and then to talk about Samoa, from the local experience, from an indigenous perspective, other than Samoa always being seen through the lens of tourism. They always have to sort of appease other people outside our country.
It's very interesting, this series, because it seems to me like it's like your big opera in a way, because you're covering all these subjects that interest you and have been present in your practice. You're talking about communities, you're talking about the landscape, you're talking about the Moana, the ocean. You're also addressing something very openly here, is the entanglement of your Japanese and Samoan culture and heritage together in the designs themselves. So you're incorporating hokusai, and you're incorporating the cherry blossom, and you're incorporating Samoan patterns.
And what's really interesting is that a lot of people ask me, like, Japanese and Samoan, like, what an odd mix. I'm thinking, like, oh, what's the right mix?
There's no.
And then so that's the kind of prejudice that I always used to face growing up. Even in Japan, being a person of color in Japan, was also something that myself and my mother also struggled with. Our Japanese family, although they were embracing, I know that, at the back of their mind, I could tell, something's going on. Through this project, I managed to sort of rekindle my relationship with Japan. But at the same time, I'm also looking at the geopolitical relationship of Japan and the Pacific, and specifically to Samoa, because Japan now has a high commission in Samoa, alongside high commissions from many developed countries. I mean, what do they want from a tiny island? Really.
And you cover so many subjects. I was reading your paper. I mean, I recommend it. It can be accessed on academia. It's a very interesting paper that you wrote about the whaealoa I nurturing the space between people and nature from 2023. On this paper, you actually dwell into the detail of what made this series, the encyclopedic, if you want, compositions that contain in each of the series a very dense plethora of very contemporary subjects. You know, extractivism, neocolonialism through tourism, the way that militarization works with the tourist industry to, you know, kind of conceal itself. Something that I saw in Hawaii, for instance, so clearly. You know, Hawaii is such a hyper-militarized place. It's been since Second World War, of course, and it's all concealed by this kind of veneer of the Paradise Islands with these beautiful beaches, and it has a very dark heart. The island where I was when I went inland to see what was in there, and you know, all these subjects that are so contentious, so politically precise in identifying what the problems of our time are, but global times, not just the Pacific, and how all this is contained in the kimonos. So, you know, I can only admire what you're doing with this, because it's absolutely...
Thank you.
It's very comprehensive.
Yeah.
And it brings in all your concerns from the beginning, because I was sorry to interrupt just for a minute,
That's
but
okay.
I was reading something a long time ago when I was looking at your practice. You studied fashion school, and you were interested in the Pacific regalia, and you were looking at collections and photographs from the 19th century where this incredible, you know, regalia in Pacific traditional attires, and the way that people wore certain objects in their body adornments. This is regalia too, and these kimonos are not garments anymore. They're sculptures, and the way they stand and the way they work together in the space is encyclopedic. Again, I like that thought, because it looks like you are concentrating the detail of the choice of the materials as well is so symbolic. So the siapo or the tapa or the natu or whatever the name for the material is in different islands is such a fundamental surface for expression in the Pacific, is the support for visual culture. And the fact that you have brought it together with the kimono culture, with usually silk or cotton culture of making these garments in Japan, and that it works as a sculpture is really interesting. But also the fact that it's tackling very important subjects. So again, you know, I think it's an incredible piece of work, and I look forward to seeing it all together.
Thank you. So I just wanted to talk about like the surface design of kimonos and surface design of siapo, because you know they're both, I mean, one's silk and one's backcloth, but they're both textiles.
Yes.
And what I find interesting between the parallels between the kimono culture and siapo culture is the attention to the surface design. Because I think that, you know, when I looked at surface design of kimonos, you know, they talk about metaphors, you know, of what's happening at the time. You know, so in a way, you know, the surface design of textiles, particularly between Japan and Samoa, is that the surface design become almost like a depository of historical narratives. And then that's when I realized that, you know, I could actually, you know, treat the surface design, you know, as something that I could actually, argue what I want to do. So, you know, the solid foundation is that, you know, it's Samoan backcloth, you know, shaped as a kimono, you know, but it's through the surface design that, you know, all of these meanings begin to unravel.
But also how complex to work with printing techniques and inks.
Yeah, so these are actually digitally printed, and then so it took me like maybe a year looking for a printer that would like risk their printer, to feed the actual backcloth, because it was a lot of 2 years of trial and error, because in order to feed the cloth through the machine, it had to be like a certain thickness. And then so I worked, alongside, with the backcloth maker, to get the sheet as thin as possible so they can be fed through the machine so it doesn't scratch the head of the printer so that it would print. But the thing is that the printing process was also very tricky, because when I worked with a graphic designer, I knew the kind of effect that I wanted is that, once it was printed onto the backcloth, I wanted to make it look like it was a watercolor painting. And then so a lot of people think that I actually sort of physically drew, on the kimono, but which I didn't. There was actually, an illustration, and then so we had to divide it into 5, and we actually have to separate various different sections to the front of the kimono, the sleeves, and all of that, so that by the time they actually open out, the images were connected to one thing to the other. What was I talking about? Yeah, the thickness of the ink was also very tricky, because when you have too much ink on it, and by the time it comes out of the machine, it looks like raincoat, because all you see is just like plastic ink. So it was a lot of trial and error to make sure that the kimono still looked like a watercolor painting, that you can actually see the texture of the handmade paper. Yeah.
Wow, amazing.
Thank you. So that's so the research in addition to the production of it. Yeah. So the lining is actually using a cotton fabric lining, so they actually can breathe.
Right.
Yeah.
And they are supported by a structure, internal
yes,
structure?
Yes, they're supported by a kimono stand in the back.
And is a particular shape of a kimono?
Yes, so the actual shape of the kimono is furisobe. So it's a young woman's kimono. Usually they're very elaborate kimono. And then so the idea is that I was supposed to wear it and dress up like a Michael, but when I actually made the kimono and wore it, it was like wearing cardboard.
Right.
It didn't look pretty.
Right.
So I've decided that I will actually present it as a series of textile sculptures.
But I can see the temptation, because you've been a performance artist for a long time.
Well, I wanted to, perform in it, dance in it,
of course,
all of that. But yeah, I think 25 kimonos are enough.
You might be able to refine the technique in some time. At some point, be able to print on a lighter material that will allow you to wear it.
Well, we'll see, because I was actually thinking of hiring somebody to train me. I've forgotten the name of this amazing onnagata dancer that I used to always watch on YouTube. And then so I thought maybe I'll become an onnagata and do a dance version of Sāmoan uta songs. Yeah, but there was a concept behind it, but I think I'll just stick to the 5-year project of 25 kimonos. It was exhausting enough.
So where are you showing it next?
So the thing is that people have been asking me whether if all the 5 phases are going to be presented together. Well, that's really up to the institutions to whether if they want to do it themselves. But there are 25 kimonos. They're divided into 5 phases, and then so 2 of the phases have already been acquired, and then so there are 3 other phases left. One of the phases are currently presented in Center for Art and Textile, Heritage Art and Textile in Hong Kong, and the others are currently being negotiated for touring internationally. Yeah.
Great.
Yes, so it has to be in like a cool air-conditioned space. Yeah.
So.